Who loves story more than Long Family? That lot love a good story. You see, even Eddie tell it over and over, so till he write it in a books. He write about Jamaica as if he's true authority here. They grow up with the best of everything from the plantations in Jamaica, bringing for this family. They get what they have from what they take from us, take from our parents, take everything for themselves. They only enjoy Jamaica because they force us to please them here. All we know is that these people hate everything about Jamaica except the money they get from what? The slave work. They hate the sun. They hate the bush. They hate we black people even though it is they bring us here. So much of them turn absentee because they can't face what they create out here. They only love the sugar and molasses what half-dead Negro make. Europeans going crazy for Caribbean products these times. Me know because me accompany Eddie on some of his business trips. 200 years after Columbus and all of Europe become addicted to our crops, things from this Jamaica. I'm talking coffee, cocoa, rum, sugar, tobacco. If you keep plantations in Jamaica in these early days, then you have status back in England. And people like to come to your house for luncheon because you have all the new foods from the Indies. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. This podcast is for and about women of colour and our relationship with nature. Hosted by me, Sheree Mack. The Earth, Sea, Love podcast is committed to exploring the experiences of women of colour with Mother Nature. We want to provide spaces where the hidden voices in the environmental and conservation conversations can explore their relationship with the natural world. Inspired by our time spent outdoors, we amplify the voices of women of colour, our stories, our conversations, interviews, photography, writing, and artwork. We'll be exploring our legacies, histories, and memories which have had an influence and effect upon how we perceive ourselves within the natural world and within the environmental and climate justice movements. Welcome to the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. The Earth, Sea, Love podcast has been made possible by the funding from National Lottery Heritage Fund. Thank you. Hi, and welcome back to the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. The extract that you heard at the beginning of this episode was taken from Zakiya McKenzie's Testimonies on the History of Jamaica, Volume 1. And Zakiya is our guest on this episode, and it's with great joy that I bring you this episode. I had a really good conversation with Zakiya. Yeah, PhDs, white establishment, racism, and getting our black and brown bodies out into nature. It was such a pleasure to chat and have a intimate and honest conversation with Zakiya, because conversations like this are few and far between, because everybody likes to be pretty nice, and it was nice to just be honest and open and talk about the reality and how you can see the contrast between being in a white predominant society, say in England, to being in a black predominant society like Jamaica, where Zakiya was brought up. Within the episode, we mentioned the book by Edward Long, and that's the Eddie that you hear mentioned, who writes books about Jamaica and the plantations and the products in the Testimonies on the History of Jamaica, Volume 1. And that is also the book that we mentioned in the episode, which had just come out in April. And you can get it through Rough Trade Books. But don't worry, all the details are in the show notes. And let's just get into this episode. I just love listening to Zakiya's voice, because it just so reminds me of my father's voice, who was from Trinidad and Tobago, and there's such a sing-song quality, rhythmical musicality to voices from the Caribbean that we don't hear enough of. So sit back and relax, and welcome to the next episode from the Earth Sea Love podcast. Thanks for being here. Bye for now. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and to be part of the Earth Sea Love podcast. Thank you so very much. You know, as I usually start off is I ask how you are. How are you? Have you been keeping care of yourself? Yeah, because we're coming out of our third lockdown in the UK. So the question is are you okay? And where are you calling in from? Are you close to nature at this point?
Well, thank you. First, thank you for having me, and thank you very much for asking. Even, that's very nice. I'm well. I said to everyone, I hope you're good, and if you're not good, I hope at least you have sweet moments in the days, and you can find small little pockets of sweetness. Because, as you said, it's so rough. Everything is so kind of crazy. So I think, considering I'm well. And I'm doing better at sleeping. So I'm, bigging up myself for that, is being conscious of the fact that I need to sleep and rest no matter what as a human being. So I'm well because of that. I'm, doing better at that. I call in from Bristol, and I'm not so much close to nature except all the houseplants in my living room right now and the flowers outside.
And yeah, definitely big up yourself about the sleep. I mean, I think it must be me getting older, but how I value sleep more now than ever before. You know, when you're young,
Yeah.
you pull these all-nighters, or you
Yes.
stay up studying, etc. I know I can't do that now because I pay for it for days afterwards. It's almost like a hangover. I'm grouchy, I've got no energy, and sleep is so vital. And when that is mashed up, it has a knock-on effect on anything. So
Yes. And one thing I found is that whereas 10 years ago I could do that, I could pull an all-nighter and the work would be good. Actually, no, there's no point, because I'm just not producing anything that if I haven't had enough sleep, it just don't make sense. Stay up and do it anyway. So I'm like working smart and saying, oh, that doesn't work, so maybe you need to start waking up early, or maybe you need to take a nap at this time in the day. So I think playing with what works best for you, as you said, and kind of recognizing even the small things, because it's so hard sometimes to know that your life needs to be better and think about these grand changes you have to make. But I'm like really taking the time for the small things, like, okay, I rearrange my bookshelf, big up, it look nice, enjoy it, sit down and look at it, it's pretty. All of those, it's the small things. I think especially now, like we have to big up ourselves and kind of other people as well. I think.
I am totally in agreement with you. And that really feeds into my word of the year, which is slow, slow and steady, and going at my own pace instead of as it has been going at other people's pace, and feeling that I have to produce and produce and produce when really that
Yes.
all that does is deplete me, make me anxious. So I'm so pleased, the sleep book, rearranging that bookcase. It is a simple thing, but it can give you so much joy and pleasure from looking at it. So I am totally on that path. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really do. Your name came onto my radar when I saw that you had become one of the writers for the Forestry Commission.
Yes.
And this was, I'm thinking it's 2019, but you can correct me. So let's just talk a little bit about that. How did that come about to be a writer in residence for the Forestry Commission? And was this the first time that it's happened?
Yeah, you're right. It was 2019, where they had, there was just a call out for writers, and I applied, and I was just lucky enough, my application hit, I suppose, the right spots at the time, and I was lucky enough to be named one of the two writers. And it definitely was the first time, and I had no clue what to expect either, no clue what even being a writer in residence meant, and in fact it was advertised as a writer in the forest, which is probably what drew me in more than a writer in residence. I might have thought, oh, that sounds kind of really official, I don't know if I can do that, but when it said writer in the forest and a woodland writer, it seemed a lot more, I don't want to say it was simple to make the affair seem less than it was, but it was definitely more comfortable, I suppose is the word, and more inviting. So because if you're a writer and you explore forest, then you might think, okay, I can do this. And so that's what drew me into it, really. It was thinking that, these are both things I enjoy doing, in sometimes I do them together, so let me try. And it was great. I mean, honestly, I had no clue what to expect. And as you said, this is now 2 years later, and that's where me and you now link up. So I could have never really imagined. I think there was definitely a naivety on my part, and not actually knowing what it would have meant, or even understanding the gravity of the forestry of Forestry England itself, to understand how far and wide, how many eyes would have been on me. I don't think I really knew. I didn't understand at the time, but pleasantly surprised, of course, and giving thanks, because it was just a lucky break. It was really good.
And I'm loving what you're saying, that idea of not knowing what it entailed and that naivety. And you could say being green about it. But I am so pleased that you were that way, because if you had been more in the know, and I say, being more in the know of like knowing how this system works here in, say, the UK, and saw the Forestry Commission and knew what that entailed, then I think that would have been off-putting for you. That and I'm saying this from my point of view of being born and brought up here, and having this idea of like establishments and organizations that could and are in a certain degree removed from us, a different way of working. I mean, I'm talking about Black and people of color, right? And the idea of like how these organizations do appear to be closed off to us. So then, and even the idea of saying writer in residence instead of and writer of the forest is like, I can see how that would totally relate, rather than that more official and almost putting on a pedestal term of writer in residence. So I'm so pleased that that writer in the forest related to you, connected to you, that you. Thank you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'm so amazed that we are here already, because you said something that my sister and I having been born here but raised in Jamaica, have been talking about recently. As people who were like grown up in a Black majority country, we have very different feeling towards the establishment and the white people and white establishments as well in England. Our peers, as you just kind of mentioned, don't want to have anything to do with it because they have those long decades of the school system. Me and my sister, we didn't experience it here. So there's a way where one, it's not that we don't care about it, but we don't, like, we're not aware of it in the very same way. We don't have the traumatic experiences probably where we closed off to a lot of them. And I'm not saying that it means we're not pushing for the same things, but in a way, it has meant that we are, or like, we don't feel any way of going into certain spaces where when you get there, like, oh my gosh, I'm the only Black person here. But we understand why once we get there. We understand why people don't want to be in these spaces, right? We understand why when we get there, we feel like this is such a cool thing, a cool free resource. Why aren't people here? When you get there, you recognize why. You don't want to be there, there's no kind of, and I suppose that feeds into all of my work in why we create our own spaces to explore the things that we want to explore, because we don't want people to be left out, but we also don't want them to be uncomfortable. And another quick caveat here is that, funny enough, I found some of your work, I think, from in doing my PhD stuff. I was looking up some papers and I came across some papers from I think it was the Caribbean Society for Caribbean Studies conference papers. And I was like, wait, I'm going to meet Sheree soon. We're going to, and it was your paper about Black British women writers maintaining two different faces. And I mean, all of that just feeds into, this idea of double consciousness of, like, you get into the space and you realize, like, oh my gosh, I'm not me who I think I am on the inside. I am me how I am being perceived here. You totally understand why people do not want to engage, right? I mean, Forestry England is a government body. When it comes out, it's government funded body, right? We totally understand why people do not want to engage with it. And so, I mean, I probably getting ahead of myself for what you want to ask me here.
No,
but,
it's it all goes in the mix. I'm glad you're open and honest, and we are discussing it, because this is why we're creating this space, this podcast space, because it's our own space where we're feeling welcome, where we feel safe, that we can explore these issues, and discuss these things that we're not able to discuss within other contexts, other spaces. And okay, yeah, we've talked the idea of, like, things have started to maybe open up a little bit since June and Black Lives Matter that we can now talk openly about racism and race, and it's not a dirty word. But is that, that's only to a certain degree. And you could say, looking at where we are now, April, not even a year has gone.
Not a full year.
And I feel like just gone back to, and I don't want to say normal, but as it used to be, it's like, now it's a case of, like, Black Lives Matter, the terrorists,
Yes.
It's like they're trying to change history and change the narrative and stop messing with it. I mean, I'm jumping ahead here because let's talk about the work that you did for the Forestry Commission was about around certain plants, say, and how your work has developed now, and you're actually looking at the colonial history of plants and how this actually feeds into our reluctance and fear being in this environment. And I really want to discuss that, because I think that's such a rich area. So can you talk about how your work is developing, your writing work? Please.
Yes. I mean, when I was with Forestry England, that wasn't I had no, like I said, I was kind of a very blank slate. I had no mandate, no clue. And they also gave me that freedom as well. So I think, what I produced in the end was nothing to what I said I was going to produce as well, because being in the space was, I suppose this is the artistic part. It was just totally different from what I expected. Also, as a person who had not engage with English forests, the woodlands, right? In Jamaica, we don't talk about the woods. We might say the forest, but we're not talking about woods and forests in the way that we think about like Robin Hood or, Alice in Wonderland is the kind of idea I would have in my head when we think about these things. So what I came up with was nothing like that because the experiences were very different. I would have been in places and saw, beautiful landscapes, wonderful things, but the places that excited me the most or I had special interest in were the the arboretum, which were, when it come down to it, tree museums. And it's just the same problems that we have talking about what the museums in England hold at the moment is the same things for the trees. So I am there looking at wonderful monkey puzzle trees and knowing that this tree come from South Africa and why is it growing in the middle of Kent, right? There's a history behind it. And there's a time when there was this botanical hunt across the quote unquote new world from Europe, right? England led the way in that a lot. And so a lot of what is held by Forestry England, by anybody who kind of has these, Kew gardens, anywhere where they hold a lot of species from around the world, there's a history connected to how they got there. And that history is a history of exploitation and extraction, probably 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10, if we're talking about a certain period of time, if we're talking about the 1600s, 1700s, into the 1800s, some people would say even into the last century, into the 1900s as well, right? It will just change. It's a different form of extraction. But so for me, these are things I couldn't ignore. And I will always say, like, big up the people who were hosting me in the forest as well, because when I kind of asked these questions, they could tell me straight up, like, they would tell, like, these Chinese tea plants have been here since hundreds of years because of this reason. Or, our area here where we're extremely focused on climate change is because we know that we extracted all these trees and we have them here. What are we going to do with them? This is a scientist, the tree people, and they're really like very skilled in the, some of the best people in the world. So it's good to hear that they are considering these questions. And I mean, and so from my perspective as well, I consider it through my writing from the perspective of a person who has had, ended up in the Caribbean because of this system that is included in the extraction, right? There was enslavement of people that was also included in the same system that extracted the trees from the Caribbean or from India, wherever, Africa, back to Europe, right? So from that perspective, from the perspective of somebody who grew up in Jamaica, knowing a lot of these plants and not knowing why I know them in Jamaica, right? So the lignum vitae, that flower is the national flower of Jamaica, and had no clue until last year. I was doing reading up some things to find out that it was one of the most the wood that was most sought after in the world at one point, because it was the hardiest wood. So when it came to shipbuilding, it was the perfect thing to have. So every nation who was on the seas was after this wood. The wood come from the Caribbean and Latin America, right? Right. This wood, these ships were slaver ships were built from this wood, right? And it's on endangered list now, or it's we don't have that much of it.
Again, exploited to near extinction.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's missing is the stories, is the histories, where we're not making the linkages of these things and recognizing. And I mean, this is my criticism of Jamaica as well, because I learned about this plant in Jamaica as a child, going to school, learning about the national symbols of my country, but I never learned about this part of the story, not at all. I just learned about the pretty part. It's this nice tree with this pretty blue and purplish flower and this orange fruit and these glossy green leaves. I never learned not a thing about why it would even be the national plant, a national plant. It's also the national tree of the Bahamas.
And
right?
It's, as you said, it's such a pretty plant as well. And you're just learning about the pretty history, and that is so true. And even if we think about the the recent hoo-ha and uprising, well, via letters and removing membership of the National Trust, publishing their colonial history connections. And if we think about the Colonial Countryside Project with Dr. Fowler, and how that has been played out in certain media outputs, if you're thinking about the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, and how they're actually attacking the individuals that are involved in the project and trying to rake up dirt about them and challenge their credentials of all they're doing is unveiling, unearthing hidden histories that has been there within the landscape, within the colonial houses and gardens, that has been, as we've just said, prettied over or concealed or neglected or forgotten. So it can be packaged to people in an agreeable way. And there's so much shame and lies that are surrounding these plants that are here, or how this money has come about to supply these houses, to build up these gardens. And I think we're doing a service to everyone when we do tap into these and bring them to light and share them, but share them because they are stories. And it's those stories that connect us, and we're hot-wired as human beings to hear stories, to take on board stories. But it really infuriates me that it's a case of only certain stories are given value, or only certain stories should be given prominence. And I do think this just feeds into that system, as you're saying, which is racism, imperialism, colonialism, and how it's always been set up just to benefit a few with vested interests. So you've talked about Jamaica. Well, let's just take a step back. You were born in the UK, but then you went over to Jamaica, yeah? And I'm interested in that comparison between the Jamaican landscape and the British landscape. And you've touched on it by saying the forest here. You don't have the forest in Jamaica, but you do have the bush, do you know? So can you talk about that contrast, please? I think it's so rich.
Yeah, there's a risk in saying we don't have the forest, because we absolutely do. We have many types of forest landscape too. But I suppose the enduring image of the forest is the woodland forest of England for me growing up there, But our landscape are, the mangroves, the tropical rainforest, all of those are actually forms of forest ecologies as well, So, but we don't even call it that. We don't say I'm going to the forest. No, you're right. We say bush. You're going into the bush, or going country. So I think there's a difference in it, because it's less of there is not the forest and the woods. That's much more separate to us, right? Maybe because the island is also smaller. So everyone is likely to have some experience with country, country being the rural areas where you are likely to have forested areas, the bush. Even if you're not traveling there yourself, you are interacting with it maybe because of the food that come to your plates, coming from a farm, coming from a market somewhere. And, I might be one of the lucky ones because my family still live in country and still farm in country. So I spent, moving back to Jamaica. I was a baby when my family moved back, my mother moved back, because my mother is the Jamaican parent. And, at the time, having young children and stuff, we were in country a lot. We went to my grandmother a lot because, you just moved to a new country. My mother had been out of Jamaica nearly all of her life. She left when she was 8 or something, 6, I think. So she had been in England for most of her life, and moving back with a young family, we spent a lot of time with her mother in country, in the rural area. And so I suppose that is how I got this experience from a long time. And again, this wasn't that common for all of my friends would be being able to go and have family that were still in rural areas, because I lived in town, I lived in a city, you know, a very city family. But you know, those are the experiences that probably shaped my interest in the British forest, because I understand what the landscape of you know, the natural landscape meant for me, and seeing the similarity in that, okay, it's a natural landscape, it probably has those properties, or it can give me that same value, or maybe it offers that value for someone else. I would like to know why it resonates with me, why it doesn't resonate with me, why it resonates with someone else, why it doesn't, you know. And that can be difficult, coming from, again, tropical places, coming from a place where the forests are palm trees, you know, coming from a place where it's riverside and beach and stuff, coming to England where, you know, it's cliche, is gray and dull and rainy. It's not, you know, it's not necessarily the same experience, but I was open to finding out what it was, you know, and then making a decision, oh, I like it or I don't like it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think you hit on that point really, really well. That illustrates the idea of, like, in Jamaica, there isn't that separation between the person and the land, you know, while that is so much the case here in the UK. And, you know, we could say that this past year there's been more of an appreciation of nature on the doorstep, the land on our doorstep, and how people are engaging with it more. And I think they can say that because there's been that long period of disconnection from nature, the environment, for the majority of people. And that idea of going to the forest or going to the beach, it is almost, it's removed and it's not part of our everyday. And because of that, as a species, we are missing out on a whole heap of deep connections with nature, but more so with ourselves. Yeah, and that connection of realizing that we are one. So thinking about, and is it black and green in Bristol, or is it black and green in Bristol? And your work, that, because Bristol's an urban area, but what work are you doing, especially with the younger population, an urban young population, of getting them back into nature, or getting them to connect with the landscape?
I must say, you know, COVID stopped a lot of the activities we would have started doing, that were, you know, a lot more of us getting outdoors with younger people. But the Black and Green project in Bristol has been, you know, absolutely great for that. It's one of these projects that came out through Ujima Radio, where I was a volunteer still volunteer there. And the project, it was a response to the 2015 Bristol being the green capital of the EU. Bristol was the green capital of Europe in 2015. And the radio station, you know, we kind of recognize that exactly what I said, is that we wanted to be, you know, involved and included, but there weren't so many things even happening in our communities. So people had to travel to the city center, and, you know, we had something at the time called the Big Black and Green Debate, which progressed into the Black and Green Project. And through that project, you know, we did things like having workshops, talking to community members about their interest, their kind of background, their history. And with young people and families also, we did these trips, which were, I mean, great successes, where we went to farms a couple of times, city farm as well, woodlands, wetlands. We went to, Slimbridge, which is a bird sanctuary very close to us. And we also did things within the city. So as you said, Bristol is an urban area. It's, you know, cityscape. And we were very kind of adamant that we weren't only, again, doing this thing where you have to go outside to go and experience nature. You have to go out into the countryside. And I mean, one, that's not even practical for a lot of us living in the cities because we don't drive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we can talk about the elements of discrimination and racism. You don't want to go out into some faraway place where you don't know anyone, or you don't, you're the only one that looks like you or speaks your language, right? So we were very kind of adamant that we were going to explore the city too. So we went to city farms, we went to a growing farm in the city, as well as the animal farm at St. Werburgh's, where we had our workshops as well. So we tried to put even just our talking events in places that were these natural settings. Taking, I think we went out with, we went to the bird sanctuary twice. I think those are our first two trips where we partnered with youth groups. So the Bristol Youth Forum came with us. And there have been other groups that we partner with. Upward Street East Side Community Trust, who works in Easton and Lawrence Hill in Bristol, which is an area that is up and coming, but also has things like the worst air pollution in the city. Has things like the big great it's such a place of contrast, a great psychopath running through it, but then life expectancy is also really low. And then it isn't surprising to hear that it's the area with the highest concentration of Somali people in Bristol.
Yes.
So we try to partner with groups that are already doing work in areas that we want to work with. And whether or not those are environmental activities that they were involved in, we said, hey, look, we have this thing. It's a trip, so our hook is always like, it's a nice day out,
Yes,
and then
jolly. We say jolly up here.
exactly, right? It's just a jolly,
Yes.
right? It's just a lime. It's just a nice time out.
Yes.
And then right? It's a lime. And once you get there, inevitably people then do the whole interacting with nature thing, because that's where we are. It's the setting, right? And we do that in the city as well. We walk our, I shouldn't say the psychopath, it's really the Bristol path, old railway path, because again, pedestrians have just as much right to use it as people on bicycles. But with our young girls group doing the path, they're going into the park, playing, identifying little plants that we learn on our trips outside of the city, and bringing some of that knowledge back in. And they recognize that they're making that connection. So it's like, oh yeah, that's wild garlic. I know that. We learned that when we went to Folly Farm the other day. So trying to go ahead.
This sounds so familiar, what we're doing up here. And what you said at the beginning is like, because of COVID, we haven't been able to do this. And, we started this conversation saying we're coming out of our third lockdown. And I project coordinate these outings and hook up with the groups and get the bus and coordinate with the partners where we go into, etc., etc. And I'm admitting it, that I'm really reluctant and apprehensive and fearful to be starting this process again because of COVID, but because of like being out of practice of doing this, because to do it, we do have to build ourselves up to go out of our comfort zone, in a sense, and step into these spaces which are unfamiliar and might not be as welcoming, or we haven't seen ourselves there. And I know the benefit of it. I so need the benefit. I know the benefit of it. That's why it was set up in the first place. It's like, oh my gosh, we have a right to be doing this, and we're not doing it. We must be doing it. We must be making these spaces so we can do it. But I'm saying this, and at the same time, it's like, oh, okay, how can we do it? And so we're safe, etc., etc. So I'm putting it to you. You're saying that things, activities have been put on hold. How are you coming out then to be doing more events or doing these trips out again? Have you started making plans? And I'm asking this for a personal level here, because maybe you could give me some because I
Yeah.
am fearful. Yeah.
You're right. Like I said, it's this apprehension to kind of get involved sometimes because you don't want to stand out. And I think so. The Black and Green Project itself, there are 3 new ambassadors. The last ambassador and I, Jasmine Ketibua Foley, and I were now kind of like alumni of the projects. And the new ambassadors have mainly had to run their project all online, and it has less engaged younger people so far. I think now they have 6 more months to go, more than 6 months now, until the end of the year. They'll be able to, probably get some outdoor stuff going. But me, I'm, outside of the Black and Green Project, just because I'm not an active ambassador anymore. I still hope to continue the trips with the groups that I kind of have worked with, because I'm still in contact with some of them. And, we built a relationship that I would love to continue. And I think the way for me that we recognize kind of quickly, and again, it's, you wonder if it's sustainable to do it this way, but we only go into spaces where we have a partner, where that people are expecting us and we know who they are and we've worked with them, and quite often they've come to us before. I mean, this is one thing that we learned actually from the Somali community, Jasmine and I, when we were the Black and Green ambassadors, is that, neither of us are Somali and we want to engage you. They told us straight up, like, you can't just come in and do research, because everybody in England wants to come and do research. Like, there has to be a relationship that is established. And quite often it means you being the one to go into their space and be uncomfortable. Be the one that doesn't speak the language and somebody have to translate for you. And you be the one that don't know how to eat the food, don't know what utensils or how to, be the one that is being explained to. And so we took that back into our project work. And I think we when we partner with people now, we try to, and I mean, it's, you can say we turn on opportunities, but if you're unwilling to do that, then we probably don't know what to expect when we come into your space. So we prefer not to, right? We can't vouch for you in a way, or we can't vouch for that you will support us. And so all of our trips in, the last, 2019 trips, I think we didn't do any in 2020, but all of our 2019 trips for sure were partnered groups, and some of these groups even gave us the funding to have these experiences while they may not have come on the trips with us, right? But there was some kind of express support from us. So we got funding from Bristol museums while they had their exhibition about nature, and we were able to use our funding to go out to one of our other partners, right? So we kind of had these relationships that we work with, and Avon Wildlife Trust has been a partner for us in that way. We've been able to go to different one of their locations so that when we arrive, they know we're coming. They have facilities for us. The kettle is on. They know that we're going to have 4-year-olds. So they have something planned for the 4-year-olds, as well as the mothers and the fathers who are there with us. And like I said, it can help you weed out who you will work with.
And it is getting that balance, because I'm thinking along the lines of going to places that we know we're just going to be there. It's an exclusive place, an exclusive garden, so we're just there. And so that aids some of their issues around fear and safety. But at the same time, we also want to be seen by others out there, so we can be changing the narrative about who has a right to be out there, because that's been part of my mentality recently. Is like, okay, I'm supposed to be right here in residence at Northumberland National Park, and that's, it's further than 5 miles away from my house, so I couldn't go. But it is work, it is a job, so I could have gone in the sense. But because the county is being inundated by people, and the locals have been on vigilant, being extra vigilant, police have been there, I haven't been wanting to be doing it, inviting the gays, and then also inviting what goes with that was, this is a stranger, maybe she shouldn't be here, and getting the police called on my ass and that sort of thing.
You're right. No, I
Yes.
mean, that's why I said we have to wonder if it's sustainable to always be hosted and always have a hosted trip where we get everyone together and it be this special event, because then where's the spontaneity and the individuals that are able to do that on their own? So it's a serious question.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I much appreciate that. So I'm looking at time, but you mentioned PhD there. Thank you so much. Because I had goosebumps there, that it's because it's not, I don't get to be recognized that way very often. It's on my bank card,
Oh, cool.
But let's talk about your PhD, because finding out about you, that you were a journalist in Jamaica and New York, and this is actually part of your PhD as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk. What is your PhD? What you're focusing on, and is it at Bristol?
First of all, big up to you. I recognized you when I saw your name. I was like, hey, I know her, celeb here. So big up to you, Dr. Mack. Yeah. But and hopefully I join you soon as another Dr. McKenzie.
Yes. That's got a lovely thing to it.
Yeah. So, but mine it's about journalists from the Caribbean in post World War II England. So it's time that we call up the Windrush era, the Windrush generation, looking at the work that was done then, because we know a lot about the kind of fiction writers. We know about the non-fiction writers too, the prose, the poetry, the essays. We don't necessarily look at journalism as a literary art in the same way, or creative writing. So there's a way how it gets left out of literature, not only Caribbean literature. And I think this could be seen for, all types of letters, studies of writing. So, and again, because of my little background as a journalist myself, it interested me to see what was happening here, first of all, in contemporary times, to know how dismal the numbers of Black writers, Black journalists, and not just Black journalists too, but I just mean, women journalists, just, the numbers were just really shocking when I saw, I think it was probably an NUJ study that I saw their statistics. And so I was interested in looking at, the history of the journalists then, the Black journalists here, because I'm like, something don't look right. And for sure, it's just not, again, it's this issue of what the gaps are in our recorded history, right? Is what we record and what we remember, because it happened, right? These things happen, but it's what we tell as our story, our collective story, I suppose. And I found all this wealth of info about really, really great alternative journalism that was happening in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Quite often, again, because they were kept out of Fleet Street, because they couldn't be, journalists on the national papers. So writers, Black writers, Asian writers, they were creating their own papers, and there are loads of them. And so I am just looking at the first three of the biggest ones post-war, post-World War II. So one from, so the Caribbean News, which a lot of people would know Claudia Jones, she was there. And then once Caribbean News folded, she started the West Indian Gazette. And then after the West Indian Gazette folded, a lot of their writers went and became a part of the West Indian World. So those three newspapers are what I'm researching and writing about, trying to add this little puzzle, this piece of the puzzle back into the picture of our history.
Yeah, and I just love that. And that's what we have to do. If we say about my PhD was about Black women writers, but poets here, how much writing feeds into our sense of self. But you need to know where you actually fit in the tradition. You need to know that there is a tradition, because that makes you feel that you belong, or that you're not alone, and you're not an oddity or a freak, that there was people that came before you and whose shoulders that you're standing on and who you can learn from. So thank you for filling in that much needed gap that needed filling in. So thank you for doing that.
My honor, really.
Reminding myself of doing the PhD, and it's over 10 years now. I just managed to get my the piece of paper the week before my second child dropped out.
Wow.
11. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, what date is it? I'm sure this is the date this week that I did get it. So she's going to be 11
wow.
a month. Oh my gosh, so this is so weird.
Yes.
But I know that PhD consumed my life. And I also know that I hit upon racism and with doing it. But I'm not going to go down that road because I could get very bitter. But where I'm going to is like, it does consume your life. Are you able to also do your creative writing at the same time as doing this PhD? I'm assuming it's not a creative PhD, but correct me if I'm wrong. But are you still able to do other writing? Because I know it took different parts of my brain to do the analysis, the theory, and then to swip into doing the creative stuff. So are you actually able to?
Well, that's what I tell my supervisor. I said, watch all the other work you see out there in the world that I've done. That's the creative part of my brain. That's not the critical part. Because it's not a creative PhD, it's critical writing. And I mean, no lie, that's a challenge for me. Because my supervisor tells me every minute, like, my writing is still flowery. It's either too flowery coming from the creative side, or it's too journalistic, because of where my writing has come from all along to get to PhD level. So trust me, I still don't have the writing for the PhD down. And so in a way, funny enough, the frustration with the writing for the PhD is actually how in 2019 I applied for the writer's residency with Forestry England, because I was ready to quit the PhD. I was so frustrated, saying, look, this writing is no good. How did I ever think I could write anything, much less a PhD? I'm no good. I kind of applied to that because I needed something to remind me that I could write, So when I sent in the application, I was like, okay, good. I wrote something. I can write. Getting it now, that was the icing on the cake, because like I said, it really validated the fact that maybe I can finish the PhD. But it is definitely a struggle, and I've taken time off. I've taken extensions. I completely interrupted last year right before COVID. Look how unlucky I am. So I stopped my studies right before they would have been stopped because of COVID anyways. But I'm back on it, and I'm kind of confident that I can finish it, because again, it's gotten so much more interesting to me in making connections between a lot of what the journalists were writing about then, and then what's happened over the last year, from Bristol and Colston, I suppose starting with Black Lives Matter in America, Ahmaud Arbery, and a lot of things have happened that when and I had the time last year to do a lot of reading, because I was at home, and the libraries were closed, so we were getting the books at home. And so a lot of the things that journalists were writing about in the 50s and the 60s, I see where, because they've been ignored, the problems perpetuate. And so it's a literature PhD, but it's so weird because I definitely have to remind myself that I'm writing about the writing and the networks, and it's not like a social science or international relations PhD. But I suppose it's what happens when the thing is personal to you, and you can see your own life and your history. And I've seen things, and I'm wondering, like, is this why my parents actually left England? Is this why they decided they were done and they were going back to Jamaica? So I think it became very personal. And so it comes a lot easier for me now, but I still, like, every meeting, it's like, where is the criticism? Where is the, where's the evidence? Where's the writers you're in conversation with?
Are your supervisors white or black?
They are white.
Yeah.
Yeah. One in African literature and one in Caribbean literature.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We're coming close to the end here, but all I want to say from someone who's been through it is, like, keep a hold of yourself as well, because you're saying it's really artificial to divorce yourself from it. It really is.
Yeah.
If we talk about what we've been, this whole thing has been about nature and how it's all connected and how we're all connected, and to actually, to get the PhD in that system, they do ask you to turn off these vital parts of you, but these vital parts of you are needed to actually produce the PhD. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So keep your voice, please keep your voice, because your voice is vital. It is vital. Here to support you in any way.
Thank you. Thanks. I must say, my supervisors have said the same thing, because I think in the beginning, I really was kind of writing like journalistically and kind of very removed from myself. But once I stopped doing that, then the story really came together, and I find I can write many more words. I don't know if that's egocentric, but I can write many more words if I think about it as a part of my own history, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really important that we do retain. Yeah. So here to help you. Before we go, is there anything that you're doing that you want listeners to find out about, or offerings or workshops?
Oh my goodness.
Got something coming out, a little pamphlet or a little publication?
Yes, and I always forget to plug all my things, so thank you for saying that. Yes, yeah, I totally have a pamphlet coming out. It's gonna start shipping April 22nd. So it's available. You can pre-order it, and it's with Rough Trade Books, and you can buy it from Rough Trade Books. It's called Testimonies on the History of Jamaica, Volume 1, and it's about again, environment and colonialism, and this extraction of plants that happened from Jamaica, and the time period I'm looking at. It's something very new for me, because I'm writing from three characters in the 1600s and the 1700s, and they're, so there was a book that came out called The History of Jamaica by someone called Edward Long, and it became the long-standing book that was, the first and the greatest so-called book about Jamaica that England had. And so I read this book, and it's just a bunch of it's a load of rubbish. It's a load of justifications. Yeah, just a justification for keeping Black people subjugated. And so this book is in this pamphlet. It's just a pamphlet. Is in response to that, as testimonies from people who actually lived through that. So they're just so it's and Rough Trade allowed me to write that, and it's like I said, it's kind of this form or genre I haven't written in this kind of fictional or historical fiction, because like I said, a lot of the things here are based on the facts. I just made up the three people who are responding to it. And so that's out soon. And I have a few more things in anthologies, but everything can be found on my website, which is just ZakiyaMcKenzie.com. Yeah. And I'll also put this up too. So yeah, big up Earth, Sea, Love.
So I'm going to get myself my hands on a copy of that. So then when I'm doing the introduction for this podcast episode, I'm going to be raving about the publication. All right. Because I do love your writing.
Thank you.
And it's such a welcome and needed voice within the British literary scene. So I thank you for being here in the UK writing, and I also thank you for being part of the Earth, Sea, Love podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.